A manager enters the town hall at 3 p.m. on a Friday to talk about company values, which is already an interesting choice for a company that has people first and work life balance somewhere in the slide deck. The setup is perfect: full room, working microphone, and enough corporate blue to make a smart puke. The topic of the day is culture, and the message is familiar: transparency, accountability, and work life balance. The corporate Avengers have assembled, although some of them apparently forgot to check the calendar before scheduling the session. The audience reacts with the most corporate form of feedback available: silence, forced nods, and the collective facial expression of people who know that open discussion has terms and conditions. People don't hate values. People don't hate transparency, communication, or work life balance. What people hate is the theater of pretending those values exist when their daily experience says the opposite. Because corporate culture is not a ping pong table, Pizza Friday, or a company hoodie. And it is definitely not a town hall where someone says, "We care about people," while half of the company is fighting a secret internal war that could have been written by George R. Martin with worse dialogue and much more Excel. Corporate culture is much less glamorous and much more important. It is the invisible system that decides how work actually gets done, what leaders reward, and what everyone knows but nobody says out loud. And this is why I have created this series. Because culture is often treated like the old man in the corner of the room. Nobody's paying attention to him because he is not flashy, he is not selling a revolutionary framework after one podcast episode and spiritual experience with artificial intelligence. But he is quietly holding the answer to half of your operational problems. Meanwhile, everybody's looking at the shiny new tool, the new transformation program, or the new strategic initiative. And listen, tools are useful, automation is useful, AI is useful, but if your culture is broken, the best tool in the world becomes just another expensive system people avoid, misuse, or weaponize against each other. So the questions I want to ask today are simple. First, what is culture and what is definitely not culture? Second, what is the impact of culture in the numbers, not in the inspirational poster section of the office? And third, what can you actually do to change the culture of your company, your department, or even just your own team? And this is not just a nice idea of people who enjoy leadership at airports. McKinsey's Organizational Health Index is built on more than 20 years of research, over 8 million survey responses, and more than 2,600 clients. The bottom line is simple: healthy organizations are 3 times more likely to outperform unhealthy ones across industry. So when everything starts burning and companies ask why people are disengaged, why execution is low, and why good people are leaving, maybe the answer is not another platform, another dashboard, or another transformation journey. Maybe the culture has been sending smoke signals for 3 years and everyone called it resistance to change. In this series, we're going to talk about culture as a business mechanism, how it improves execution, retains talents, and helps people speak up before problems become expensive. We'll talk about healthy culture, toxic personalities, and leadership behavior, because culture is not a soft topic. Culture is the operating system of the company. And your company already has a culture. The question is simple: it is helping your company perform, or is it silently charging you interest every single day? My name is Borja, and welcome to my channel. To understand culture, we need to stop treating it like office decoration and start treating it like the operating system of the company. And for this, Edgar Schein's model is useful because he basically tells us culture has layers, like an onion, or like corporate bureaucracy, but with slightly less pain. At the first level, you have artifacts, the visible stuff: office design, rituals, and the people first poster next to the meeting room where people get psychologically executed every Tuesday. At the second level, you have spouse values, what the company says it believes. Ownership, collaboration, accountability. All the classics, the kind of words that looks excellent in a strategic deck, but as soon as the reality enters the room, they disappear faster than Twitter's workforce after Elon Musk bought the company. And then, at the deepest level, you have underlying assumptions, the real rules of the game, the things people learn through experience, what actually gets rewarded, what gets punished, what gets ignored. This is also where people learn what gets you invited to the important meeting and what gets you left outside with a polite, "we'll keep you in the loop." Which, as we all know, is the corporate equivalent of a Tinder date saying, "you're amazing as a friend." This deepest layer is where the real culture lives. Not in the words, in the lesson people absorb from leadership behavior. Because healthy culture is not what soaks into employees from slogans. It is what soaks into employees from the decisions and actions of the people above them. If one of your values is ownership, but every time there is a problem, two heads of departments start finger pointing and throwing responsibility at each other like they are trying to remove evidence from a crime scene, everyone in the meeting learns the real lesson. If you want to survive here, never hold it back. Learn how to move the corpse into somebody else's closet. That is culture. If one of your values is merit, but the only person getting promoted is the guy who goes drinking with the boss, then the smart employee learns that performance is optional and that becoming the company's Jeffrey Epstein is apparently the real career path. That is culture. If one of your values is communication, but executives complain that nobody tells them the truth and then leave the room in silence the moment an employee gives them news they don't want to hear, the organization learns very quickly. Do not bring reality into the room unless reality has been pre-approved. This is also culture. And the lesson is brutal. Shut up, hide the problem, and wait for someone else to touch it first. This is why culture is the company OS. You can install the best software in the world on a broken operating system and it will still crash. You can buy new tools, automate workflows, and hire consultants. You can rename departments and put transformation in the title of 17 people. But the cultural operating system says, avoid responsibility, protect your territory, and politics beats performance. Then every new process will eventually be infected with the same logic. The tool is not the problem. The behavior around the tool is the problem. So when people say, we have a communication problem, sometimes they're right, but often communication is only the symptom. The deeper problem is that the culture made honest communication unsafe, useless, or career limiting. When people say, we need more ownership, sometimes they are right, but often ownership is impossible because the organization punishes the people who take responsibility and protects the people who dodge it. When people say we need better execution, sometimes they are right. But often execution is slow because the culture has trained everyone to wait, cover themselves, and avoid being the first person to make a decision. That is why culture matters, because culture is not what appears in the values deck. Culture is what people learn they must do to survive, succeed, and avoid becoming the next sacrifice in the weekly alignment meeting. But culture does not walk into the room like Inigo Montoya in The Princess Bride saying, "My name is Bad Culture, you killed my operation, prepare to die." It is usually quieter than that. Companies often treat culture as a people issue or a vibe problem, but bad culture is really a business problem. It damages execution, talent, and sometimes even safety. You see, you see it in slow decisions, fake alignment, and quiet resignation. You see it in strategy decks nobody follows and meetings where everyone agrees in public but disagrees in private, like a very boring episode of House of Cards. And as we mentioned earlier, McKinsey's organizational health research shows that healthy organizations are 3 times more likely to outperform unhealthy ones. Translation: bad culture is not just uncomfortable, it is an early warning system for future decline. First, bad culture creates strategic paralysis. Companies do not fail only because they lack intelligence consulting or strategy documents. Sometimes they fail because their culture rejects information that contradicts what the company wants to believe. Digital Equipment Corporation is a useful example. DC was once a major success, but its strong engineering culture struggled to accept the simpler turnkey products that the market wanted. The market changed, but the culture stayed loyal to the old definition of excellence. And when your culture worships yesterday's success, tomorrow starts looking very rude. This is how strategy dies. Not in one dramatic meeting, but in 1,000 small moments where people say, that is not how we do things here. Consultants see this all the time. A recommendation can be logical, data backed, and beautifully formatted, but still die on arrival if it clashes with the company's real culture. The text says transformation, the culture says absolutely not. Second, bad culture destroys collaboration. Amoco, before its acquisition by British Petroleum, is a strong example of a blamed culture. The real rule was simple. When something went wrong, the first question was not, why did this happen? It was, who is responsible? That distinction matters. Why creates learning? Who creates suspects? And the punishment was not always public or dramatic. Often the person associated with failure was quietly marked in the memory of senior managers. No big sin, no formal sentence, just a silent career penalty box. Fewer opportunities, less trust, slower progression. The corporate version of being buried alive, but with better stationery. So people adapted. They learned to distance themselves from failing projects as fast as possible. They became careful around risky problems. They waited for someone else to touch the dangerous work first, because nobody wanted to be left holding the bag when the music stopped. Shane describes how this became so toxic that even joint ventures became difficult. Amoco employees felt too exposed. If a collaboration failed, even because of a partner company, they could still be blamed internally. At that point, you do not have risk management. You have career survival with a corporate logo. And third, bad culture can create safety disasters. And this is where the topic stops being funny. In high-risk industries, a culture where bad news does not travel upward can kill people. Aviation, energy, and healthcare are obvious examples. In this environment, silence is not just inefficient, silence is dangerous. Communication failures across hierarchy were part of the cultural problem behind Korean Air's fatal crashes in the 1990s. NASA Challenger, NASA Columbia, and Deepwater Horizon are also discussed as cases where assumptions around cost, schedule, authority, and safety contribute to catastrophic failure. The pattern is simple. If people are trained not to challenge, not to escalate, and not to disappoint authority, reality eventually sends the invoice, and reality is not known for flexible payment terms. Bad culture also destroys talent. Good people can tolerate pressure, complexity, and hard work. What they usually cannot tolerate forever is unfairness, distrust, and leaders who say people first, while treating people like replaceable furniture with calendar invites. In punitive cultures, good employees leave when they have better options. The people who remain are often exhausted, politically adapted, or very good at surviving dysfunction. This is dangerous because the company slowly starts selecting for the wrong behaviors. If unreachable targets are combined with low psychological safety, people may stop telling the truth and start inventing reality. We have seen versions of this in cases like Volkswagen and the Veterans Administration, where pressure, targets, and fear contributed to distorted or dishonest reporting. If the system rewards numbers at all costs, people will eventually give you numbers at all costs. Congratulations, you asked for performance and accidentally built a fraud machine. And then there are cultures that reduce people to rankings, percentages, and boxes on a spreadsheet. Metrics matter. Of course, I like metrics. I work with metrics. But when the system becomes dehumanizing, morale does not improve because you added another dashboard. People are not Excel rows with anxiety. Although, to be fair, some corporate systems really try to prove otherwise. Finally, bad culture can kill the company. Not metaphorically, economically. Some companies do not survive their own assumptions. DEC and Amoco both eventually stopped existing as independent companies. Corporate decline is always complex, so culture is never the only factor. But culture can become the thing that makes adaptation impossible. And when an organization cannot adapt, the market does not send a polite calendar invite called strategic reflection session. It just moves on. Sometimes the only way to fix a deeply broken culture is destruction and rebirth, acquisition, turnaround leadership, or massive restructuring. This is the harsh version. The better version is to diagnose the cultural problem before the organization needs corporate surgery without anesthesia. Because bad culture is not just bad vibes. It is hidden costs, it is delayed execution, it is talent leakage, and in the worst case, it is the beginning of the end. Now, here's the part many leaders don't like to hear. Culture cascades from the top. Not because employees are shit. Actually, employees are actually very good at reading the room. They know what the official message is, but they also know what behavior survives contact with reality. If the CEO says transparency, but directors punish bad news, transparency dies somewhere between the town hall and the first uncomfortable meeting. If a director says ownership, but every problem becomes a professional tennis match of blame between departments, ownership dies before lunch. And if a manager says, we are one team, but rewards the loudest person in the room every time there is drama, the team learns very quickly that attention goes to whoever can produce the best corporate soap opera. This is how culture cascades. People don't copy slogans, they copy signals. And signals are everywhere. Who gets promoted? Who gets protected? And who somehow keeps surviving despite behaving like a rejected villain from Succession. This is why culture is not only a C-level problem. Yes, the top matters a lot. But if you manage a team, even a small one, you are already creating a microculture. Your team learns from you, not from the values deck, from you. From what you repeat, what you reward, and what you pretend not to see because dealing with it will ruin your Tuesday. So the practical question is not, how do I create a perfect culture? The practical question is, what are the few behaviors I can actually enforce consistently? Because a simple value you can live by is better than a glorious value you betray twice a week before coffee. If you want a culture of ownership, define what ownership means in your team. Not as a mystical corporate word, but as a behavior. For example, when there is a problem, we clarify the next steps, we define who owns it, and we don't disappear into the fog like Batman after giving zero documentation. If you want a culture of communication, define what good communication looks like. Maybe it means bringing the news early, with facts, impacts, and options, not just throwing a grenade into Teams and writing FYI. If you want a culture where unnecessary whining is not rewarded, then be very careful with your attention. If you spend all your time with the loudest people and almost no time with the silent, reliable ones, the team will learn the real rule. The more you cry, the more management attention you get. And congratulations, you just built a complaint-based performance system. This does not mean ignoring problems. Real problems need attention, but noise and signals are not the same things, and a good manager has to learn the difference. Fairness matters here. Treat people with consistency, not identically in every situation, because context matters, but consistently enough that people understand the rules are not changing depending on mood, politics, or personal friendship. Minimize exceptions. Exceptions can look kind in the moment, and sometimes they are necessary. But when they become inconsistent, they become dangerous. If you bend the rules too often, then the day you finally enforce it, the person who gets the short straw will not experience it as fairness. They will think management is incompetent, biased, or that the rule only applies when they are the unlucky target. So when you make an exception, understand the reason, explain the logic when appropriate, and ask yourself what precedent you are creating. People feel safer when the rules are clear, stable, and applied consistently. They may not always like the rule, but they will respect that your word means something. And then we need to talk about toxic high performers, because every company has had or will have the sacred monster, the person who delivers results, knowing the system, and saves the day. While emotionally poisoning, while emotionally poisoning every room they enter, the Doctor House aura works on TV because the episode ends after 45 minutes and nobody has to file an HR complaint against Hugh Laurie. In real life, if your top performer undermines colleagues in public, uses passive aggression as a communication style, or walks around with the self-awareness of Joffrey Baratheon, you don't have a genius problem solver. You have a cultural depth with legs. And unless you can afford to load all the work of the department onto that one person forever, you need to separate two things clearly. Praise the performance, punish the behavior. You can say your results are strong, your behavior is not acceptable. Both can be true. This is where many managers fail. They think correcting the behavior means denying the performance. No, you can recognize contribution and still refuse to let someone turn the team into a hostage situation with a dashboard. Long-term culture is built by what you protect. If you protect toxic behavior because it delivers short-term results, the team learns that behavior is optional when performance is high enough. If you protect fairness, accountability, and respect, even when it is inconvenient, the team learns that the values are real. This is how culture cascades, not through speeches, through repeated signals, through consistent decision, through what leaders do when it costs them something. Because anyone can defend values when it is easy. Culture starts when defending those values becomes uncomfortable. So this is the starting point of the series. Culture is not slogan, town hall, or a motivational poster staring at you while you slowly lose faith in the weekly meeting. Culture is the operating system of the company. It decides what gets rewarded, what gets tolerated, and what people are afraid to say. And if that operating system is broken, everything else becomes harder: communication, execution, and trust. In the next video, we're going to talk about the one of the fastest ways to damage the system: toxic personalities inside your team. The brilliant jerk, the drama generator, the professional victim, the person who does not break the team in one dramatic explosion, but slowly Yoko Ono's it from within until everyone is tired, divided, confused, and pretending the bad is still fine. Because toxic people are not just an HR inconvenience. They are culture carriers. And if you protect them for too long, eventually the team learns that the toxicity is not a bug. It is a part of the system. So in the next episode, we'll look at how to identify these profiles, how they damage performance, and what leaders can actually do before one person turns a functioning team into a reunion tour nobody asked for.